Honourable Minister, Excellencies, as is Pacific Convention, may we start this evening's event with a short prayer. May I call upon Mr. Vilisoni Galobongindua to say the prayer.
Let us bow our heads and place ourselves in the presence of the Lord. Glorious Heavenly Father, we humbly stand before you in prayer before we commence our official program to welcome the Senator, the Honorable Penny Wong, Minister for Foreign Affairs Australia, in a visit to Fiji and the Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat to demonstrate the importance Australia plays in their relationship with Fiji and their Pacific engagement. We realize that without your blessings, we would not be able to succeed with our plans. Bestow your grace and divine wisdom to all of us present here and to those joining us virtually, so we could cooperate and enjoy camaraderie and love for the greater glory of your name. Your word reminds us, Father, that blessed is the hand that giveth than the one that receiveth. Lord, bless Australia and its leadership in its generous gesture. Hear this our prayer. In Jesus' mighty name we pray. Amen.
Naka Vilisoni, we acknowledge the Almighty who's amongst us. We acknowledge the land on which we are gathered, the indigenous people of Fiji, their ancestors and rich history, and their graciousness to allow thousands of others to make this beautiful country home. Senator, the Honourable Penny Wong, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Australia, Secretary General Puna, representatives of the Forum Chair, resident Forum heads of missions and senior officials, crop colleagues and staff. My name's Lisa Williams-Lahari. I'm the Public Affairs Advisor at the Forum Secretariat, and I'll guide this evening's proceedings. Before Minister Wong delivers the keynote address, may I invite the Forum Secretary General, Mr. Henry Puna, to say a few words of welcome. SG.
Thank you, Lisa. Senator, the Honourable Penny Wong, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Australia, or shall I say the newly sworn Minister of Foreign Affairs of Australia, heads of missions and representatives of the Pacific Islands Forum missions here in Suva, representatives of crop agencies, senior officials joining us from across our blue Pacific, representatives of the media, ladies and gentlemen, good day. Kia orana, pulovinaka, and welcome to this very special gathering this evening. Minister Wong, may I, on our collective behalf, congratulate you on your successful election and appointment as Minister of Foreign Affairs for the Government of Australia. Your visit to Fiji this week, indeed your very first bilateral visit as Foreign Minister, represents in itself a very strong shift in Australia's political landscape and the value it attaches to its regional partners here in the Pacific. Australia is and continues to be a valued partner and member of our Forum family and plays an influential role in our region as the largest member of the Pacific Islands Forum. I must say, Minister, that I was particularly heartened by your vision and commitment to integrate the Uluru Statement from the heart and weave the voices and practice of Australia's Indigenous people into your diplomacy moving forward. Indeed, our respect for culture and Indigenous identity here in the Pacific is what sets us apart from the rest of the world. and I welcome this special move by yourself and the Australian government. Together with this announcement, we have seen and heard over the last few days a range of political commitments that have begun to shape the foundation of Australia's renewed foreign policy direction for the Pacific region. At the heart of this, Minister, is your commitment to listen and work with us as partners to overcome some of the greatest challenges facing our region and our Forum family at this particular time. I welcome your government's recognition of the ongoing climate crisis and your strong commitment to work with us to address this. Your assurance on strengthened climate ambitions will be integral to Forum Island countries as we begin in earnest on our preparations for COP27 later this year. I am hopeful that we, as the Pacific Islands Forum, will take to COP27 some of the strongest advocacy positions and priorities that we have ever developed as a Forum family. Minister, this is an issue so critical for our survival, and we cannot settle for anything less than urgent climate action now. As we work towards the finalization of the 2050 strategy for the Blue Pacific continent, I am quietly hopeful that this strategy, which will represent our renewed commitment to Pacific regionalism, will set the tone for our collective action as a Forum family going forward. Our solidarity is and should always be the basis of our collective engagement, and it will depend on our ability to work together, to listen to each other, and to deliver on our collective regional priorities. For those of you who have not met Minister Wong before, Minister Wong comes into the position of Foreign Minister at a critical time in our region's history, and I'm sure that we will all be relying on her wisdom and experience to help us navigate the challenges ahead. Indeed, her illustrious background and political experience is testament to her life of service, first and foremost, of course, to her constituents, but more broadly to Australia and Australians the world over, and by extension to her friends and family right here in the Pacific. Minister Wong, me taki maata, thank you very much for making the journey to Fiji and to the Secretariat this evening. With those very brief remarks, I invite you now to deliver your keynote address. Thank you very much.
Bula vinaka, vinaka vaka levu. Can I say what a pleasure it is to be back here in the Pacific, particularly as part of the new Australian government? Can I acknowledge your wise and gracious Secretary-General, Henry Puna, and the staff of the Pacific Island Forum Secretariat? Can I acknowledge representatives from the Council of Regional Organisations, senior government officials from the Government of Fiji, members of the Diplomatic Corps, members of our Pacific Vuvale, joining us from around the region, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen. Well, this is my fourth day as Foreign Minister. And it's my first bilateral visit, as Secretary-General said, and I hope I will be here often, and I hope that we can work well together as we deal with the challenges and opportunities this world presents us with. And in particular, I'm deeply honoured to be here at the Pacific Island Forum, the preeminent Pacific institution, the heart of Pacific regionalism. For more than 50 years, the Forum has brought us together in the Pacific way, Through the Forum, Pacific nations have championed their interests on the international stage and led international thinking on issues such as climate. My country is a founding member of the Forum. It's a membership we treasure. And I've come here on day 4 because I wanted to say in person and in the Pacific, on behalf of the new Australian government, how deeply we value being part of the Pacific family. And to our Pacific brothers and sisters, I want to say thank you. Thank you for your stewardship of our shared blue Pacific with all of its amazing biodiversity. Thank you for being custodians of some of the planet's most ancient cultures and so many of the world's languages. We feel a profound sense of kinship with the Pacific, of wanting to connect with the Pacific as part of one family. We have long-standing bonds forged in times of crisis, but sustained in peace and in prosperity. And these bonds are evident in the dynamic contributions made by the Pacific diaspora to Australian life in music, in culture, sport, academia, the many thousands of seasonal workers who contribute to our rural communities, support critical industries while gaining valuable skills. And one of the most powerful and moving examples of the depth of our bond was the way in which our Pacific brothers and sisters came to Australia's aid during the Black Summer bushfires and more recently the devastating floods. It reminds us that we do what families do, be there for each other in good times and in bad. And that's why I've travelled here this week, to make clear on behalf of the new Australian government and in particular on behalf of the new Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, that our commitment to you is this: we will work with you to make our Pacific family even stronger. We will listen and we will hear you. Your ideas about how we can face our shared challenges and achieve our shared aspirations together. I was Australia's first ever climate minister, and I know the imperative we all share to take serious action to reduce emissions and transform our economies. Nothing's more central to the security and economies of the Pacific. I understand that climate change isn't an abstract threat. It's a present and existential one. In the Pacific Island Forum's Boyd Declaration on Regional Security from 2018, the first key article that I actually referenced a number of times in our election campaign is this: we reaffirm that climate change remains the single greatest threat to the livelihoods, security and well-being of the peoples of the Pacific. You've been saying this for a long time. Pacific leaders were saying this to me when I was Climate Minister over a decade ago. And you've been crystal clear and you've been consistent. You've led the global debate. I acknowledge that and I understand that under past governments, Australia has neglected its responsibility to act on climate, ignoring the calls of our Pacific family to act, disrespecting Pacific nations in their struggle to adapt to what is an existential threat. But whether it manifests in rising sea levels or in disastrous bushfires and catastrophic flooding, climate change is happening across the Pacific family. So I assure you, we have heard. As our election last weekend showed, Australians understand the imperative of acting on climate change. The climate crisis loomed as one of the key concerns to the Australian people. And there was a huge groundswell of support for taking real action on the climate crisis in Australia. And the new government is firmly committed to making it happen. We were elected on a platform of reducing emissions by 43% by 2030 and reaching net zero by 2050. And we're not just going to say it, we will enshrine it in law and we will submit a new nationally determined contribution to the UNFCCC very soon. We are committed to transitioning to a low-carbon economy and moving to cleaner and cheaper energy. And the plan that we have will see the proportion of renewable energy in Australia in our national energy market increase to 82% by 2030. So it's a plan that's about boosting renewable energy, creating jobs and reducing emissions, because we will end the climate wars in our country. This is a different Australian government and a different Australia. And we will stand shoulder to shoulder with you, our Pacific family, in response to this crisis. We understand that we need to work together like never before, for our peoples and for generations to come. That's why we've announced an Australia-Pacific Climate Infrastructure Partnership to support climate-related infrastructure and energy projects in Pacific countries and Timor-Leste. It's why we will work to regain Australia's role as an international leader on climate change. We will reinstate the role of Australia's Ambassador for Climate Change, and we have proposed a bid to co-host a future UN Conference of the Parties with Pacific Island countries. And I'm looking forward to further discussions in the region about this idea. My brothers and sisters, our region has not faced a more vexing set of circumstances for decades. The triple challenges of climate, COVID and strategic contests will challenge us in new ways. We understand that the security of any one Pacific family member rests on the security of all. And we have a collective responsibility as we face these challenges to secure our region's interests today and in the future. And as Australia's Foreign Minister, I commit to working with you and to listening to you, this generation of Pacific leaders, to navigate these challenges together. We will remain a critical development partner for the Pacific family in the years ahead. And Australia will be a partner that doesn't come with strings attached, nor imposing unsustainable financial burdens. We're a partner that won't erode Pacific priorities or Pacific institutions. We believe in transparency. We believe in true partnerships. We will respect Pacific priorities and your institutions. We will support growth and development that is sustainable. We will contribute to the long-term stability and security of the Pacific. We will expand opportunities for Pacific workers in Australia whilst also improving their working conditions. We will deepen our defence cooperation and our maritime cooperation, and we will offer quality climate-resilient infrastructure, and we will increase Australia's overseas development assistance to the Pacific by $525 million over the next 4 years as we work with you in the recovery from the pandemic. I also know that Pacific women have a key role to play in that recovery and in your economic development. Societies work better and economies work better, communities work better when we remove barriers to the participation of women and girls, when all have an equal place in national life. As the countries of the Pacific continue to chart a course to the recovery from the challenges of COVID, we know that women and girls, their status, their participation, their education, their safety will be a vital part of that recovery. We will always seek to work in partnership with our Pacific family. Part of that partnership will be reflecting Australia's full identity to our family. I believe there is vast untapped power in the reality of modern Australia. You see, the world is multicultural and so are we. There are at least 270 ancestries represented in Australia. Nearly half of us were born overseas, including me, or have at least one parent born overseas. This gives us capacity to reach into every corner of the world and say we share common ground. And as Foreign Minister, I will tell Australia's full story, our modern diversity and, of course, the rich heritage of our First Nations peoples. Australia is proudly home to the oldest living culture on the planet. And I thank Secretary General for his kind words about the Uluru Statement from the Heart, a statement delivered in 2017, a generous offer to all Australians from First Nations peoples to take the next step in our journey towards unity and reconciliation. the Albanese government is committed to implementing the Uluru Statement in full. Voice, treaty, truth. And we will move to enshrine an Indigenous voice to Parliament in this term of government. And this builds on the legacy of the former Prime Minister, Kevin Rudd, who in 2008 ensured that his Labor government, of which I was a part, finally delivered the national apology to the stolen generations. And we will develop in my portfolio a First Nations approach to foreign policy. We will appoint Australia's inaugural First Nations ambassador, who will lead a new office in the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. And on a range of other fronts, we will be working to enhance the role and position of First Nations peoples both at home and abroad. We will do more to share our voice and reflect Australia's modern identity in the region by boosting Australian broadcasting and media content, and we will increase support for media training and capacity building across the Pacific. For generations, Pacific Islanders have been adding to and shaping Australian culture, and we welcome the contribution people of Pacific heritage bring to Australia. We want to look at ways we can continue to build upon those links. Australia will do more, and we will do it differently. We will ensure that those Pacific Islanders who come to work in Australia are treated fairly, with better conditions. We will allow workers to bring their families. And we will create the Pacific Engagement Visa to provide a pathway to permanency for 3,000 members of our Pacific family per year. But ultimately, our relationship with our Pacific family is not a suite of initiatives. It can't be counted only in dollars or MOUs. It's so much more. Because nothing will change our geography, our proximity. Nothing will change the fact that our future is intertwined. So can I say to my generous hosts here in Fiji, Vinaka, thank you. Thank you for your climate leadership on behalf of the next generation. And I say to you, this government will continue to work with you to strengthen our Vivale partnership. I'm delighted that so many Australians are finally able to return here, a place they regard as their home away from home. And to the Pacific Islands Forum team, Vinaka, thank you for having me here today. The forum is where the Pacific family, in all of its strength and diversity, gather to speak with a unified voice to the world, because a united Pacific is a stronger Pacific. I look forward to the forum meetings in coming weeks, and I know Prime Minister Albanese is looking forward to listening and contributing positively to the leaders' meeting. So today, or this evening, I was keen to use the opportunity to start to underscore our commitment to doing our part to strengthening our Pacific family. And I was keen to emphasise that we understand that central to this is action on climate change. But we will draw on all elements of our relationships to achieve our shared interest in a stable and prosperous region where rules and sovereignty are respected. You see, as fellow members of the Pacific family, our security and prosperity are truly things we achieve together or not at all. And like any family, when we listen, when we understand each other's concerns, when we act in partnership together, we will succeed. Thank you very much. Shall I do that?
Thank you very much, Minister. We'll ask you to a very comprehensive presentation, Minister, and don't sit down because we are going to have you back here on the podium. Thank you very much. We do have much to look forward to, given the eloquence, the list of great ambition that you have delivered to us in your presentation. We look forward to that delivery under yourself and Prime Minister Albanese's leadership. There's lots of work to be done and, of course, many questions to be asked about that work. We do have with us in the room members of the Fiji Media Minister, and we will, without further ado, begin with Fiji Broadcasting. Christiana from Fiji Broadcasting. Christiana from Fiji Broadcasting, if we can have you take the mic and deliver your question.
Thank you. Congratulations, Senator Perry. I did a short clarification from you before I ask my question. If that's all right? You mentioned in your speech that the Pacific is facing three threats, and you mentioned COVID, climate, and strategic conflict. Does China's growing influence in the Pacific fall under that category?
Sorry, what was the last part?
You mentioned the three threats that
Yes,
the Pacific is facing.
strategic contest, I think was the word I used.
But my question, thank you for that clarification. My question to you is, how do you propose to counter China's growing influence in the Pacific in the next 3 years while you're in office as the Foreign Minister for Australia, instead of just using the Pacific as a strategic platform to power play with the big countries like China? Thank you.
Well, one of the key themes of my speech was to try and emphasise really two things. One is we are proud and to be part of the Pacific family, and secondly that our security is intertwined and our prosperity is intertwined. So I don't approach the discussion about China and China's activities by looking at the Pacific as if it is abstract from Australia. I look at this and think, what is it we need to do to work together to ensure that regional security is fostered and supported by the region. And as I said in the speech, that we make decisions together, and Pacific Island nations make decisions, Pacific Forum members make decisions which reflect that the decisions of one country does affect regional security. So I respect the sovereign right of every nation to make its own decisions. But Secretary General and I were talking before, these aren't decisions in the abstract. These are decisions which affect other nations and the region as a whole.
Thank you, Minister. Next up, we have Rakesh from Fiji Times, and after Rakesh, Lide from Today Media. Rakesh.
Bula Minister, I'm Rakesh from Fiji Times. The China Pacific Island countries development vision draft document has been shared by China as the 5-year action plan. But Minister, will Australia actively encourage Pacific Island countries to opt out of signing such a deal?
What we will do is work with you. What we will do is to work in partnership with you around your development, as we have. And I've outlined today additional support, including the power of our proximity, the labour movement and the additional visas are a recognition, that we are geographically close. I suppose ultimately Pacific Island nations will make their choices about what agreements, what partnerships they engage in. What we would urge as Australia is consideration of where a nation might wish to be in 3 or 5 or 10 years. I always think that's a good way to approach big decisions. Think about where you might be in a decade. Australia will continue to do what we have done under both parties of government, whatever my criticism of the former government on climate. I mean, they've made substantial investments with the region on development and infrastructure, and we will continue to do that. And in fact, we will put more energy and resources into the region.
Thank you, Minister. Can we have the mic across to Lithe? And after Lithe, we will have Wati from Fiji Sun.
Bulavanaka, Madam Minister, welcome
Bulavanaka.
to the Pacific. My question is to do with climate change. It's a little bit complicated. You've made it clear. Thank you very much for that very detailed speech on what it is the new Australian government intends to do with regards to improving and enhancing and increasing its commitment to the rest of the world and especially to the Pacific on climate change. We welcome your information on increasing your NDCs. However, the governments of the Pacific and also the youths of the Pacific have specifically asked of the Australian government, the past and the present, to look at its coal exports, to look at its gas projects, to keep fossil fuels in the ground. I stand corrected if I didn't hear it properly, but I have not heard from the Australian government tonight on its commitments in that area. How can your government claim to be credible on climate change in the Pacific if you continue to pursue fossil fuel projects which will continue to contribute to global emissions? And the second part of that question is that China has said it will do what the Australian government hasn't, what the United States government hasn't, and other of your allies haven't done with regards to climate change. Thank you. Can you react to that?
What are they saying they will do that we haven't?
What I'm
Because
asking
most of
for,
the coal
Madam,
we export
your
is actually to
response that.
China.
I'm going to let you respond to
Sorry,
that
no, but I
question.
don't understand the second part of your question.
The second part is I'm asking for your reaction to what seems like China's accusation that your climate change agenda that you've presented is narrative and lip service.
Well, it is true we export a lot of coal to China. That's true. Look, I understand why that call is made. And what I'd say to you is we have the world economy and the Australian economy is going through a transition. And I understand for some people, particularly the younger generation, they don't want to wait for that transition. But we all have to manage that transition responsibly and in a way that enables continued economic prosperity and equity. So we are lifting our ambition very substantially, and it isn't just lip service. We will put this in law to be on the path to 2050 net zero emissions. And our policy rubric the policy framework is as all nations of the world have agreed. So we agree to do in our country what we have to do to reduce our emissions. And each country needs to do that. Now, what that will mean over time, if each nation does do that, is the world will move to cleaner forms of energy. So global markets, as people would anticipate, will make decisions about energy sources, including coal. But our policy is to transform our energy grid, as I said, 82% renewable energies by 2030, which is not that long away, and to advocate for other countries to do the same. And if other countries did get on that sort of trajectory as well, then you'd see a transformation of the global economy, which is ultimately what we have to achieve, is transformation of the global economy. I don't understand the accusation of lip service. And I don't think it was yours. I think you were quoting others. Yeah, I'm not being critical of you. It's disappointing. And I hope that you get the opportunity to ask as many questions of the Foreign Minister when he comes as you get to ask of me.
Thank you, Minister. Wati from Fiji Sun. After you, CFL, Naval.
Vinaka, and welcome to Fiji, Minister Penny Wong. My question is, how do you intend to deepen relations with Fiji when it comes to Australia's continuous assistance to BlackRock and having an observer coming to Fiji for the next general election, Vinaka?
To BlackRock, right? I think Ewan would have to answer this question. 4 days in, look, we work in many ways to support Fiji and the countries of the Pacific in their democratic exercise, and we'll continue to do that. But I will ask my official afterwards to give you a bit of a more detailed briefing.
Naval, if you can get yourself close to a mic.
Good evening, ma'am. I'm at the back.
You're at the back.
Nabil from CFL. My question is, you mentioned that people going to Australia will now be able to take their families with them.
Yep.
I'm asking if you can elaborate when and how that will be rolled out, and whether that will be extended to people who are already in Australia working under the Pacific Labour Scheme, and how will that go about? Thank you.
Well, I hope you understand 4 days in we haven't quite worked all of that administrative arrangements out. So to be clear, there are 3 classes of visas that we want to put into place, and the policy was developed in opposition, in fact, in dialogue, unofficial dialogue, of course, with Pacific Island representatives. So there is the shorter term visa, which I think is currently called the Seasonal Workers Program, which would not have additional family rights. But then there is a longer visa, 4 years, that we are proposing, where we have said we would structure the visa so that people could bring their families. And that was a response to, I suppose, not so much complaints, but observations that it was very hard for people. I understand for many nations, remittances are an important part of the economy. It's a hard thing to be away from your family for that long, not good for the family as well. So we wanted to provide that longer term visa with family rights as well. The third category is a completely new category, and it hasn't been done before, but we're quite excited about the prospect, and that is 3,000 permanent visas per year from the region. So people who could come to Australia under that arrangement and attain permanent status in Australia. It was modelled on, I think the New Zealanders have a similar type of visa, which people might be familiar with. And we think we can talk a lot about people-to-people links. I have to stop hitting that. Talk a lot about people-to-people links, but we really need to also put in place the mechanisms to build that even more than we have, and we think this is one of the ways in which that can be done.
Thank you, Minister. Our final 2 questions will come from Dev Policy blog ANU author Sadhna Sen and Samisoni Peretti of IB. Thank you, Sadhna.
Vinaka, Minister Wong. Just a follow-up question on the labour mobility schemes. You pre-election announced the Pacific Engagement Visa, which you just spoke about.
Yeah.
And I guess it's too early to sort of say when this will commence.
When would you like us to commence it?
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow, is it like that?
However, a follow-up question to that. Remittances which come from these labour mobility schemes are great for the individuals, normally unemployed or underemployed in the Pacific. But what are Labour's schemes in terms of really growing the Pacific with regards to investments where employment is created in the Pacific and Pacific peoples live at home and are able to grow? Secondly, do you think Australia is militarizing the Pacific by increased military cooperation, especially in Fiji, thus inviting conflict to an otherwise peaceful region? Last question, how important is aid effectiveness to the Labour government? You spend the most per capita in the region, yet aid in the Pacific, according to DFED's own reports, is largely ineffective, even on women's empowerment. How do you plan to change this?
First, the Labour schemes are obviously not the only thing we do, and we provide a lot of development assistance to the region, and the logic of that isn't just an ethical imperative. We all do better if nations can develop and if poverty is alleviated and if economic development is sustainable. That is, not just environmentally sustainable but economically sustainable. And that's how Australia would approach it. I don't agree with the militarisation assertion. I think Australia, as part of the Pacific family, our objective is to ensure that the region is stable and prosperous and sovereignty is respected, and that security is provided for by the Pacific family. And I think under successive governments we have sought to do that in a way that is respectful and supportive. ODA effectiveness, that's a perennial question, isn't it? Whether, how do you maximise the effectiveness of development assistance? And we judge ourselves in terms of what we do in the DFAT review. We have high standards. We don't seek to create unsustainable debt levels. And look, I understand that, and we will work to always improve our development assistance effectiveness. But I again say to you, our objective is your independence and your own economic sustainability and prosperity. It doesn't come with strings attached.
Pulavinaka, Madam Minister, and congratulations to your appointment, as well as the victory of your party last weekend.
It only took us 9 years.
Naka. My question is on Indigenous rights, and we've noted your government's position on the First Nation and the Uluru Statement from the Heart, and tonight's announcement about your special envoy appointment. We would love in Fiji if the Fijian government can also do the same, but my question is, what would you hope the leaders of the Pacific and the peoples of the Pacific can take from your position on Indigenous rights?
Well, first I hope that it means that our relationship can be on the basis of who we are and not who some might have perceived us to be. So I was born in Malaysia, and how Malaysians saw Australia was not as multicultural as it is, and certainly didn't have an aspect of our First Nations heritage and how they saw it. And so I was really keen when we were working on the domestic policy, so the voice and how we're going to proceed with the Uluru Statement, to think through how that could actually inform our projection of who we are to the world. And how does that benefit us? Well, I hope what it enables is a strengthening and enrichment of our relationships. I hope that's what it does. I hope that what it says is, look, we can talk to you as Penny Wong migrant, Senator Patrick Dodson, who's the father of reconciliation and a proud First Nations man, and how he might talk with you about your experience here and about what we can do together may be quite different. So I hope it enriches and expands our connection. That's my hope.
Thank you very much, Minister. May we have a round of applause for this remarkable moment. And just before we have a vote of thanks from Secretary General Puna, I just want to acknowledge as well the very powerful opportunity that we saw demonstrated here tonight of a leadership prepared to take the curly questions, of a leadership that has announced its intentions to support media engagement, media training, and many of the journalists in this room today are able to ask those very questions. I'm standing here today as part of the media training programs that Australia has delivered. So in so doing, accept the hard questions, but accept an immense amount of gratitude and engagement to come, and more questions to come. Honourable Minister, thank you again for this evening. Thank you to those media partners who have joined us virtually. And a big, big apology that we did run out of time, but also a very big thank you to those journalists here who have asked questions on their behalf. I'd like to now pass on to the Secretary General for his closing vote of thanks.
Thank you, Lisa. Maybe some of us don't know. The minister was sworn in on Monday morning. 2 hours later, she was on the way to Japan with Prime Minister Albanese. And then she had to come back all the way from Japan to Adelaide, where her family is with 2 young kids. And then she had to come to the Pacific here in Suva. Doesn't she look fresh as a daisy? I don't think I can match that. So, Honourable Minister, may I, on behalf of all of us here today, including those joining us virtually from across our Blue Pacific region, say again with deep respect and appreciation, me taki maata. Thank you very much for your reassurance and commitment this evening. As I mentioned earlier, your visit to Fiji this week is indeed a clear testament to your government's commitment to reframe your relations with our Pacific. Indeed, I've always been of the view that change, in whatever form, is inevitable, and that the onus is on us to embrace it and to capitalize on it as best we can. And judging by the questions tonight, we are certainly trying to do that. Yes, as a Forum family, we have a multitude of challenges before us, but I'm a firm believer that nothing is impossible if we are committed to working together in the interest of our common goal. So, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we've all heard this evening from Minister Wong Australia's renewed commitment to our Pacific family. And I think it is safe to say, Minister, that we will hold you accountable to this in the days ahead. However, we must show our appreciation again to Minister because, you know, the government is still being finalized. And as of now, there's only 5 ministers that have been sworn in. And yet she had the commitment and the confidence to make all those commitments and assurances that she has made tonight. So, Minister, again, Vinaka Vakalivu, thank you very much for making this journey to our region. Your very first bilateral visit as Foreign Minister, and we look forward to working closely with you to deliver for our Pacific people. That said, business is now over. Work is finished. I take great pleasure in inviting you, Minister, and your delegation, and everyone here tonight to join us in a bit of relaxation in the Fale just behind. And thank you again, Minister, and all the very best and safe journey on your way home. Thank you, everybody. Please, can we rise and
Vinaka Vakalevu SG and everyone, guests, as you join us through the open doors there, can I ask our forum staff to make their way across to the Fale and prepare for the reception to follow? Thank you.